So firstly, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to everyone for the second talk in the Challenges and Changes in Physics lecture series. My name is Dr. Alex Ramadan, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at Oxford Physics, and I'm the host of the series. And I'm really happy to see you all here joining us today. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to give a little bit of background about the series, what we want to achieve, and what we ask of you. And if you came to the last talk, the intro is very, very similar. But I think it's really important to emphasize the goals that we want to achieve from this series and the expectations of attendees. So within Oxford Physics, we have a lot of talks on all the different types of research which take place both within our department and the wider research field. And one of the things I felt was lacking was the space to talk about social issues which affect the careers of researchers and therefore the research. I think it can often feel like there are two different conversations happening, one where we talk about how to do excellent research and one where we talk about how we can build a supportive and inclusive community for our researchers. But to me, this is the same conversation, and we need a supportive, diverse and inclusive research community to be able to do the best possible research. Who we are and our experiences shape the way we think and the problems that we care about. And only by having a representative research community can we ensure that we tackle the problems which interest and affect everybody. And ultimately, diversity in physics will only benefit the work we do. So we wanted to create the space within our department to have the conversations necessary for us to build towards an inclusive and diverse community. And often this sort of work is carried out by a small number of incredibly dedicated and hardworking individuals, like the speakers that you'll hear from in the series. All of our speakers have done incredible work to improve the lack of diversity in physics and the wider scientific community. I hope that by hearing about their work, we can all be inspired. We can further our understanding of the issues which we face and what we can do ourselves to improve our community. And I know that getting involved in this sort of work can seem like a very daunting task. And you as attendees might feel like you want to help and get involved, but you don't know how. And hopefully these talks will help you in this. We want these talks to be a place where we can all learn and be inspired by our speakers in a supportive and welcoming environment. And we all have a responsibility to look around us and see the problems which are present in our physics community and do our bit to fix them. So this leads me on to what we ask of you as attendees of this talk. We want these talks to be as welcoming and positive as possible, and there will be time at the end of each talk to ask all of our speakers questions. All I ask is that the questions are respectful and align with the aims of this series that I just told you about. So there are two ways you can communicate with us during this talk. The first is the chat button, and it should be at the bottom of your screen, and you can use that to send a message to us as the hosts. For example, if you're having any technical difficulties. The second way is through the Q&A function, which has a separate button. Again, it's probably at the bottom of your screen. This is where you can post your questions as the talk progresses, if you want to. And at the end of the talk, I can pick them up and I'll ask Clara your questions. So another thing to know about the questions, we have an upvote function. So if you see a question that you think is really important and you'd really like to get asked, just upvote it. And that way we can avoid the repeat questions. So we have one more talk this year, and sign up details for that will be posted in the chat, and full details for future talks and also for that talk is on the Oxford Physics events webpage. And now, the reason why we're all here. I'm delighted to introduce our second speaker of the series, Dr. Clara Barker. Clara is a material scientist who manages the Centre for Applied Superconductivity in the Materials Department here at Oxford University. She is the chair of the university's LGBT+ advisory group, and she does extensive work raising the visibility of trans and LGBT+ scientists both nationally and here in Oxford. I invited Clara to be a speaker in the series because she's just such an incredible role model and advocate. She works so tirelessly to support, uplift, and make the scientific community more welcoming for people who identify as LGBT+, but also people from all underrepresented and minority groups. And I think she just does brilliant work. So it gives me great pleasure to now hand over to Clara for her talk in the Challenges and Changes series. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you. Blushing a little bit. So let me just share my screen. Let's get that going. So I just have to click share, and hopefully that is all good. So yeah, thanks for that lovely introduction. I will say that I'm speaking between two heroes and role models of mine, Jess Wade and Dame Jocelyn Bell Brunel. So I feel very much out of place, but hopefully you'll still enjoy this talk. And I realize that, like I say, Jess has already talked and Jocelyn will be talking. So I'm going to very much sort of look at the LGBT inclusivity in, to be honest, education throughout this talk. So yeah, I'm the chair of the LGBT plus advisory group to Oxford University. I'm the Dean of Equality and Diversity at Linacre College. I'm on the Equality and Diversity panel for the Royal Society. And I also make YouTube videos on science and also chatting with other scientists. In fact, I'm going to be releasing one tomorrow with the Royal Society of Chemistry on a new toolkit they've released. So do have a look at that if you're interested. I do spend most of my time in the lab. That's what I do. And this is a pulse laser deposition system. So I very much enjoy working and making thin films by physical vapor deposition. That's my bread and butter. I've been doing it for quite a few years now, especially by magnetron sputtering. Again, I've got videos on these techniques on my YouTube channel. And I don't just love magnetron sputtering because of the pretty beautiful plasma glows that we get. The science is really interesting as well. So I'm going to just go a little bit over sort of diversity in science. And I realize that with previous talks, you might have already heard some of these, so I'm not going to linger on them too much. But we know that women probably make up, women make up around 23% of people in STEM, but 50% of the population. So we have a sort of deficit there. There's a difference between the percentage of the population and the people in STEM. And of course, depending on the field, that can very much change, with some fields faring worse than others. We also know that when it comes to earning sort of higher money, say over 50,000 per year, then nearly 36% of male academics earn that much money, but only 22.5% of female academics earn that money. There was also a recent report from the UKRI and the EPSRC that showed that women are less likely to put in big grants as principal investigators, but they're also, when it comes to the bigger budget grants, they're less likely to get them as well. So we've got, it seems like indications are there's some sort of inequality there. We can talk about disabilities in STEM. People with disabilities are 60% less likely to stay on from a PhD to a postdoc position. So clearly there's something about the research environment that we're losing additional people, especially people with disabilities, going from PhD to postdoc. And just to give you, an overview of disabilities in academia overall, 3% of professors disclosed themselves as disabled, and 4.2% of non-professional academic staff. In STEM, the numbers are slightly lower at 2.6% of people disclosing a disability compared to 3.8% outside of STEM. And yet 22% of the population discloses as having a disability. So there's a big disparity there between the population percentage and the people in STEM and academia. And also when it comes to race, we see that Black people in particular are very much more likely to experience harassment and bullying in STEM fields. 62% of Black academics have said they have experienced bullying in STEM compared to 30% of white people. So it's probably no surprise that BME men are less likely to stay in STEM than white men. And when it comes to the number of professors in the UK, we have over 14,000 white male professors, over 14,000 professors who are men, and only 90 Black professors who are men. Women, we have nearly 5,000 female professors in the UK, and only 25 of them are Black. And again, when you look at the academics, the percentages of those that are in academia, the percentage of academics in the UK that go on to become professors for white academics is 11% and less than 5% for black academics. So you might have sort of heard those numbers, but I feel that I would be missing a chance to talk about these numbers. I think I would be omitting them if I didn't talk about them. LGBTI plus specific challenges though. So what we see is that 40% of LGBTI plus people in STEM are not out. They're not able to tell those around them that they're gay, that they're trans, that they're bisexual. And indeed, in America, there was a report that showed that 1 in 3 US physicists were told that they should keep their sexuality a secret. They should stay in the closet because it would harm their career, because it would harm their promotion. And sadly, with LGBT students, we see that on top of race and on top of gender, LGBT students are 10% more likely to, less likely to enter a STEM career than non-LGBT plus people. So what this means is that we're losing LGBTI plus people as we go along through the academic STEM career, through STEM careers. What was great, last year there was a report released by the Royal Society of Chemistry, the Institute of Physics and the Royal Astronomical Society. It's an in-depth report and it was exploring the workplace for LGBT plus scientists in physical sciences. There was a lot of data in this. It was quite a big report. And I will say that they had responses from over 1,000 people. So it's pretty good, data. And it was definitely looked through very rigorously. And what they saw is that women are more likely to be harassed because of their gender identity or sexual identity. Women are more likely to be harassed than men, and non-binary people are much more likely to be harassed. And comparing trans people and non-trans people, trans people are twice as likely to be harassed for their gender identity or sexuality than non-trans people. Now, one thing that really stood out to me is this group of statistics. So 30% of LGBT plus respondents said that they consider leaving STEM sometimes. Remember that I already showed that report that said that there is further attenuation. LGBT plus people are 10% more likely to leave, but 30% of LGBT plus people consider leaving STEM compared to non-LGBT plus people, which means that LGBT plus people are twice as likely to think about leaving STEM on a regular basis. And when it comes to considering leaving often, trans people are 20% likely to consider leaving often. And this stands out to me. This really, really stands out to me because I thought that I could not be transgender and be a scientist. I did my undergrad, I did my PhD, I worked in industry, I did visiting posts and I worked as a postdoc. But there was a certain point where throughout all that time, I thought that I couldn't be myself. I didn't think that I could tell anyone that I was transgender. So I was hiding who I was. I thought I had to hide that. And a big part of that was because in 13 years working in STEM, I met 2 out gay people, no openly bi or pan people, and no trans people. And so if you don't see trans people around you, you don't see LGBT people around you, the assumption is that you're not allowed to be LGBT plus and a scientist. It's just an assumption. If I've seen no trans scientists, why would I think that I could be the only one? So I was considering leaving, and despite having a good reputation and doing a lot of collaborative work, and having worked visiting posts and postdocs around Europe, towards the end of my career, I decided that I had to transition, that I could no longer not transition because it was not good for my mental health. And I just assumed that meant my career in science was over. I didn't see any other option. So it's not really surprising, but my mental health was bad, which meant that I wasn't necessarily working as well as I could have done when I was in the lab. And I certainly didn't think that, I certainly wasn't in a frame of mind where I could think about writing. So I wasn't writing papers, even though, to be honest, I was still doing an awful lot of experiments. Instead, what I was doing was looking for jobs outside of STEM. I actually signed up for a conversion course in a completely different field because I assumed I couldn't be a scientist and be trans. Now, I'm very happy to report that I only came to Oxford just to prove that that was true, that I would face discrimination for being trans. And I came to the interview, and as it happened, I didn't face that discrimination. In fact, I was asked questions about my abilities, my skills. I was really surprised that I was expecting that discrimination, and I was really surprised that I didn't get it. And so when I was offered the job, of course I took it, but I hadn't expected to be offered the job. Like I say, I expected to go home fuming at how rude I'd been treated, and actually it was really nice, and I'm really grateful for my group. I think they're brilliant. But I was very close to being one of those 20%. And so you wouldn't be hearing from me now if I had left. You wouldn't even know that I was one of those 20% because I would have left. I wouldn't have responded to this report. So these numbers are probably lower. They're certainly lower if you were to take into account the people that would like to have STEM careers but have left. And just a quick point, is being LGBTI plus a mental illness? I love that there's this story from Sweden in the 70s that being gay was counted as an illness, a mental illness. So there was these protests where people rang in work gay, said, "I can't come into work today. I'm gay." This happened in Sweden in the 70s, and I think it's just such an amazing grassroots protest. I think it's a really good way of doing it. But over the years, being gay has been declassified by the World Health Organization. So it is no longer classed as a mental illness. The World Health Organization have been saying that being transgender isn't a mental illness for a long time, but they only actually declassified it last year. So I'm not sure why there was that holdup. However, unfortunately, whilst it isn't, being LGBTI plus isn't a mental illness, we have a lot of social stigma. There are a lot of things that do cause mental health issues. And I have some really upsetting figures coming up, but just to give you an idea of what's going on with LGBTI plus people around, in society. So I apologize for these, but the people who are not LGBT plus make serious considerations to suicide. We say that about 2% of the non-LGBT community make serious considerations to suicide. That goes up by a factor of 10 for LGBT plus people. So that goes up to 20%. And when it comes to the trans community, we're talking 45%, with a third of trans people making a serious attempt. And these numbers are often, you see people will say, oh, the numbers aren't accurate, and they question them. But we see very, very similar numbers coming up time and time again in different reports. And the truth of the matter is, when I go into a group of trans people, it isn't, did you consider suicide? It was how, because it's such a part of our culture, unfortunately, and it shouldn't be, but it is, unfortunately. And I know I count myself in those numbers. And I'd love to say that it was a rosier picture for young people, but sadly we see the same numbers for young people as well. And we can't ignore what's going on in the wider world when we're trying to widen participation in physics, when we're trying to bring people into science. We have to know what is going on with young people in the world. And nearly half of LGBTI plus young people are being bullied in school, and 2/3 of trans pupils are being bullied in school. 1 in 10 trans pupils are receiving death threats. And again, these numbers, people dispute these particular numbers. I run youth groups, and these numbers tally with what I see on a regular basis. Young people don't even have the guarantee that they'll be able to come out at home. They don't necessarily have someone at home that they can come out to. Very few young people have someone they can talk to at home. And the Albert Kennedy Trust did a survey, and it said that 25% of young homeless people are LGBT plus, and nearly 80% of those say that they were kicked out of home because they were LGBT. And that's in the UK. But, you know, and I say that people dispute these numbers, but there's some stats from America as well. A third of LGBTI plus people are dropping out of school, which is 3 times the national rate, mostly because they don't feel safe. They feel like they're being bullied. And so young people, LGBTI plus people, are not doing as well at school as non-LGBTI plus people. In fact, for trans people, they're much more likely to drop out of school in America than non-trans people. And it should be no surprise that these numbers get worse when you also factor in race as well. So that's America and the UK. But then what about India, say? So there was a survey of 400 LGBT youth in India, in this town, and more than half skipped school to avoid bullying, and a third dropped out altogether. So these numbers are coming in pretty similar in different countries. And it's all well and good looking at these numbers, but sometimes, you know, you have to look at the people as well. So so there's this personal account. School bully started teasing 6-year-old Shemba for walking in a feminine way and graduated to stone throwing when the transgender girl, initially raised as a boy, started wearing girl's uniform aged 10. So Shemba dropped out of school altogether and abandoned her dream of becoming a lawyer, with begging or sex work now a more likely future. And there are similar testimonies in the American reports. And I'll tell you now, I work with LGBTI plus young people, and I hear the same things. These are smart children that they don't want to finish school and get good grades. They want to finish school so that they can go, so that they can leave. And what if those people could be fantastic scientists, but because of the issues that they're facing at home and at school, what if we're losing future amazing physicists because of what's happening in schools? And just, you know, if you're transgender in the UK, so if you've managed to survive school, and we've talked about the suicide rates, but, you know, what's life like in the UK for a trans person? Well, 40% have experienced a hate crime in the last 12 months. 30% of trans people have faced domestic abuse. 1 in 4 trans people have experienced homelessness. 35% of trans university students have experienced negative comments or behavior from staff. And actually 1 in 8 employees have been physically attacked by colleagues or customers. This is in the UK. And just to bring it closer to home as well, there was a report by the Oxford SU in 2018, and the numbers, well, the numbers tallied as well. Nearly 2 in 3 trans students said they have experienced transphobia or discrimination at Oxford University. And 30% said that was from 30% of those said it came from academic staff, 25% from administrative staff, and 82% from fellow students. So we're often told, well, you know, it doesn't really matter. We don't care. Just get on with it. Be yourself. Let the science speak for itself. Just do the science and you'll succeed. It doesn't matter who you are. Science doesn't care about who you are. But you've got to understand that these are quite, you know, this background, the people that are coming to our university, they're coming to physics. Some of them have been through an awful lot already. And then if they carry on receiving that harassment, it's no wonder that they're more likely to drop out rather than succeed and go on through STEM careers. And, you know, we see the sort of language that's used around LGBTI plus people in the UK as well. And not just the UK. So there's one of the pictures that I have on screen, it says "Stop the Fags," which is an extremely derogatory term. And this was actually on the side of a bus stop. It was on the side of lots of bus stops in Australia during the equal marriage debate. And not only that, but they were actually using statistics to say that gay people were more likely to abuse children if they were parents, using non-peer reviewed papers. You know, the statistics, they weren't necessarily academically rigorous, but it was okay to put this on the side of a bus stop, for example. I'd love to say that we don't have similar stuff in the UK, but the government announcing that young people are going to be learning about LGBTI plus people in schools has led to protests, as we know. And an MP actually said that parents should choose when kids are exposed to LGBT issues, exposed, kind of like we expose people to the plague, like we expose people to COVID, like it's something that we might catch maybe if we start talking about it. And I just want to say that I went to school in the 80s. We had a thing called Section 28. We were not allowed to talk about LGBTI plus people during the 80s and 90s. In fact, it was only revoked in the UK in 2013. So I was not exposed to LGBTI plus people. I heard nothing about them. It wasn't talked about. There certainly wasn't any support. We only had 4 TV channels, so I wasn't seeing LGBTI plus people on TV. We didn't have the internet. And yet we still had a happy childhood, I should say, even with 4 channels and no internet. But somehow I still knew I was trans, despite no one telling me about it, despite the fact that no one was giving me information or support and that I thought it was wrong. I still knew deep down that I was trans, even if I didn't have the words. And the truth is, in the UK, a third of the population still think that being gay is a choice. We know that this isn't true. No one chooses to be trans. We've seen the stats on bullying and stuff. Why would anyone choose that? If anyone knows what's going on in Chechnya, for example, there are people who are actually being rounded up and reports of gay people being killed. And, you know, and yet people are still gay, even when they're facing literally their own lives. It's no better when it comes to trans people. This tweet from The Economist last year, should trans people be sterilized before they're recognized? So basically, I should not be allowed to have children. In fact, we should make sure that I don't have children if I transition. It sounds an awful lot like eugenics to me. So we've got this kind of sentiment going on around us. And as much as I work with vacuum and most of my science takes place in a vacuum, science isn't in a vacuum. We're all exposed to the world around us. And so we see things, we see pushbacks. We have a society where people feel that they can push back when it comes to us saying that we should have better gender equality in physics. People feel confident, excuse me, people feel confident to be able to say, there's no problem with sexism. Physics is built by men. Women just aren't as good at physics. Now, one thing that I will say on this comment, physics was built by men. Well, you know, a lot of the big discoveries might have been made by men, but don't forget that that's because women weren't allowed to do science. And so, of course, there was less women doing science, which meant that more discoveries were made by men. That just makes sense. That's just, you know, so of course, it doesn't mean that women are less capable of having made those discoveries. And when it comes to racism, you know, we see that people are pushing back against this idea that we should get rid of institutional racism in STEM. People feel very comfortable saying, no, there's no such thing as racism in STEM. People are writing articles openly saying, my group doesn't see racism. There is no problem with racism, despite the fact that people of color are saying, well, actually, yes, there is. And why is this? So I used to say that equality is like cake, that there's, you know, that equality is not like cake, that there's plenty to go around. We're not going to run out. Truth of the matter is that's not really true. That was very naive of me to think that. You think about the current climate with COVID and the mass unemployment. And so if you make sure that everyone has an equal chance to get jobs, then what that means is that, you know, there's more competition for those jobs. So if there were some people who maybe had an advantage because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexuality, because of their disability status, those people had a higher chance of getting jobs when there was inequality in the workplace. If we increase equality in the workplace, then their jobs are going down. So cake is limited, and this is true with funding as well. I talked about the percentage of people getting funding, the percentage of women getting funding. There's only so much funding to go around. We know this. It's pretty limited. It's got so much worse over the last 15 years. And so if everyone has an equal chance to get funding, then yeah, some people are worried. I don't know, a cynical mind might say that people are worried about the competition, that maybe they won't meet the cut if it's a equal world and everyone has the same chance to get that funding. But that's just a cynical voice. I don't know. And why should we care? Why do we really care whether we have improved diversity? I mean, apart from it being the decent thing to do, making sure that everyone has the same opportunities. Well, there's been a couple of surveys over the last few years from the financial sector is a good place to look. And what they've said is they've done these reviews. And what they've seen is that groups that are more diverse through binary gender and through through racial equality, what they've seen is that the more diverse a group in terms of those two things, the more profits those groups are actually making. So what they're actually saying is like, you know what, as banking financial institutions, you're going to make more money if you've got a more diverse group. Now, there aren't loads of reports. People have only started really looking at this over the last few years. People haven't really cared in the past. But we are starting to see stuff in science as well, along a similar line. So there's a number of papers in science which show that the more diverse a group is, the more likely they are to be cited. Now, I think that we can say that if we're being cited more often, that means that those papers are of a higher quality, that their science is better. And what we're seeing is that the more diverse the group, the more likely they are to be cited. So from a science point of view, it seems like there is a benefit that science does win by looking at improving equality. Now, again, this is looking at binary genders and race, but, if one equality is good, chances are other equalities are good too. Like I say, these are new studies. This is a new field. This is a new way of looking at things, but the signs are there. There's indications that it's actually good for science. And that doesn't surprise me. It means that all of a sudden you've got different people with different ways of looking at it, different viewpoints, looking at problems that maybe we've not been able to solve for years. And it's really good to see our learning societies actually looking at this and going, you know what? Yes, we want to make sure that we create a more equitable field for science. So the Royal Society have been putting on events for LGBTI plus scientists as well as other diversities. The Institute of Physics have done a number of things. I realize the Institute of Physics have had some bad press lately, but I still work. I was in a meeting with them yesterday, actually. I'm still working heavily with them because I still believe very much in them. And the Royal Society of Chemistry, in fact, a couple of years ago, the Royal Society of Chemistry, their education in chemistry, had a whole bunch of articles for LGBT History Month. And one of them that I wrote was, I was talking about the importance of role models, because I said earlier, in 13 years in STEM, I met 2 out gay people. And sadly, the truth is that we can't go through the history books and look for LGBTI plus scientists that, we weren't talking about, because chances are those people kept it to themselves. We don't know that they were queer. And sadly, some of the people that we do hear about, the very few LGBTI plus role models we have, they might have a tragic story. Alan Turing, when he was convicted of homosexuality, he took his own life. He was still working on maths. He still had more discoveries to make. Sally Ride, the physicist and astronaut, she kept her same-sex relationship a secret for 27 years that she was in the public eye. Ben Barres, a neuroscientist, talked about how when he was considering transitioning, he thought that he would never be able to stay as a neuroscientist, and so he considered ending his life. So it's a lot less easy to find role models through history, unfortunately. So, we need to have role models now. And like I say, I find it really important to speak to young people. I run youth groups. I'm a Stonewall school role model, and I go in talking about LGBT stuff, but then I'm also a scientist. I'm at Oxford. That has an impact. And I do things like TED Talks, for instance. This is great. This is from a toolkit from the Royal Society of Chemistry, which is coming out tomorrow. And it's a drawing of someone watching my TED Talk, which is not something that I could have expected to see, but it's really cool. And honestly, you know, I'm doing something right. I've been invited to the weirdest places. So what can we do? We can support our scientists. So Pride in STEM and 500 Queer Scientists on Twitter are two great organizations. LGBT Stem Day, the third annual LGBT Stem Day is actually going to be held on the 18th of this month. Oxford University is going to be hosting the 6th annual LGBTQ plus Steminar. So this is a great day conference. It isn't talking about people's queer stories, it's queer people talking about their science. It is a day of science and it's a wonderful event, and I'm looking forward to that in January, although there's an awful lot of work to do. The Royal Society of Chemistry, they had the report with the Institute of Physics and the Royal Astronomical Society that said that there weren't enough resources for working with LGBT people. The LGBT people were facing particular barriers. So what they did was they've put together a toolkit, a whole collection of resources, and that's going to be released tomorrow. There's, I'm going to talk about the Tigers, the Inclusion Group for Equity and Research in STEM. And we're trying to make sure that we get the data, we find out whether certain groups do face barriers when it comes to accessing funding. Then we look at why, and we're trying to lobby the funding bodies to make sure that science is more equitable. Over the summer, there was an issue that it was difficult to have a good, strong, diverse conference. And so what the Tigers in STEM did was we put on a series of webinars over the summer. We had a really diverse lineup. We had fantastic high quality science talks of all different people. And sure enough, we had the numbers. And bearing in mind, we did this with no resources. So I'm very proud of that, to be honest. And there will be another one in chemistry coming up. And so people often say, you know, I think that it's very easy for people to say, well, we all have the same opportunities. Well, I've already talked about our history. The truth is that there's all these barriers that we just don't think about. And maybe some really silly things like, I know that I have been in engineering buildings, and they say that we want women engineers, and yet the men's bathrooms are on every floor and the women's are on every third floor. So that's saying we want women, but we're not prepared to put the bathroom space in. What about when we say, oh yes, all our buildings are accessible, but then the lift breaks down all the time? The accessible entrance is around the back of the building, and sometimes that doesn't work either. Who are we naming our buildings after? Look, there are some amazing people that have made some amazing discoveries, and there are some questionable people who, once we hear about their personal views, you know, they're no longer quite the role models that we thought. It doesn't mean that they didn't make the discoveries that they made. It doesn't mean that they didn't make those advances in science. And so it doesn't mean that we should stop crediting them for making those discoveries. But do we need to be naming buildings after these people as well? Do we need to be naming prizes after these people? There are amazing scientists around us. There's plenty of other people we can be naming prizes after and buildings after. Heck, you know, some certain named buildings, you seem to have one in every single university. Why not stand out a little bit? And this idea of grit in academia, you know, just pull yourself together, get on with it, just, you know, work all the hours you can. You know, unfortunately with lockdown, what we've seen is that there's a gender divide in the amount of papers that are being published potentially. You know, it seems to be disproportionately affecting certain groups. So we can't just get on with it. There are these barriers. And honestly, why can't you have a diverse panel? Why is it so difficult to bring in different speakers? Honestly, if you're struggling to find a diverse panel, then two things. One, your field isn't welcoming and people don't want to be in that field. Or two, you need to expand the people that you're talking to. And yes, it means putting in a little bit more work, but make sure you have a diverse panel. And I've heard, I've heard it before where I've heard people say, we've got a really diverse panel. There was 50% men, 50% women. And I'll say, okay, but were they all white? And well, the answer is often yes. But what I'm saying is that there's some easy things we can do. There's some things that we can think about. Like say, it'd be nice to just make science equitable for everyone. It would be great if we could let people be themselves. What if with that extra, what if that person that didn't finish school because they were LGBT, what if they were the person that could have solved the COVID crisis earlier? What if we have lost a person who could maybe solve fusion energy a lot sooner because they had such a bad time as a PhD that they didn't go on to be a postdoc? What if we are pushing out our future, magnificent brains, our Jocelyn Bell Brunels, our, Dorothy Hodgkins? What if the way we're treating people, it means that we're not actually getting those people through? And we keep on talking about how we're the best of the best. No, we're the best of the people that survived. The number of people that have just not gone on to do science, we can't say that we're really the best when we can't actually compare ourselves to everyone. And I mentioned fusion energy. So I have a YouTube video on fusion energy. Of course I do. It was really fun to do, actually. It's mostly because they have superconductors. But just to let you know, so for those that know about fusion energy, we're looking at, producing energy. And so far, JET has the record. They put in 24 megawatts and they got out 16 megawatts. So basically, we're putting in more energy than we're getting out. But we're working towards parity. We're looking to increase it. And that was a fantastic achievement. So far, the longest plasma has been 10 seconds at East in China. Not exactly going to be powering countries in the next few years. And in fact, the next generation, so they've started building ITER this year. ITER in France, it should be finished by 2024. Hopefully, they'll be able to have fusion power in ITER by 2035, and maybe we'll have some results by 2040. So in 20 years. How much does it cost? Well, it's cost about 20 billion, say, thereabouts, 20 billion. So a lot of time and a lot of effort, which is interesting because fusion power might not work. We might not be able to build fusion generators that give out more energy than we put in. But we're willing to put in that money. We're willing to put in that time because we think that we could solve the future energy crisis. We think that we might get fusion energy working. So we say it's worth putting in that time. It's worth putting in that money. And yet we seem to not think the same of our physicists. And like I say, what if we just made things a little bit better for young people in school? What if we just made it a little bit better for LGBTI plus people in their undergrad, in their PhD, so that they stay in? Maybe they'll solve the problems of fusion a little bit earlier. I'm going to finish with this slide. This is a picture of a cheap pink plastic recorder, a musical instrument. And this is found in the Bate collection in Oxford University. So the Bate collection has all these really expensive, gorgeous, beautiful wooden wind instruments. And alongside it is this pink plastic recorder. And people keep on saying, why is this here? It shouldn't be here. It's out of place. It doesn't make sense to have it here. Do you know that in blind sound tests, people cannot tell the difference between this and the super expensive old wooden wind instruments? So people make assumptions based on what they see, but actually the output, the result, the sound quality is just as good as those ones that we value more than this cheap pink plastic recorder. And I think we should start doing the same with scientists. So with that, thank you very much.
Oh, Clara, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. And also, oh, sorry.
Stop sharing my slide, I think.
Sure. I mean, they're great slides. I have no qualms with you leaving them up. So one of the things that I kind of wanted to say in your intro, but I didn't know how to word it, is thank you for the way you speak about your experience and how open you are, and also just like how, I'm not going to find the right words for it, but the way you talk about like mental health and your experience just feels really personable and relatable, and I just love it. And I think that's one of my favorite things about the way you talk about the issues. And so thank you. I didn't know how to word it, so I hope I've done that.
Thank you. I'll be honest, like 5 years ago, I couldn't talk about these things in this way. I couldn't be that honest. But when I actually started, when I was able to, and I started sharing my experiences, the number of people that come up and say, I've got the same problem, I've had the same thing. The number of people that have come up to me and said, I'm the first trans person they've ever seen speak. And they were expecting to leave science because they didn't think there were trans scientists out there. And so I don't know. It means that I can share those stories because they're important, and it's not just my story. I'm one voice, but it's good to have. But I think some people find that my voice is useful.
It definitely is, and I think you also just like, you do it so well. So thank you so much. I also, so before we get onto the questions, I just felt like I had to comment. Your slide with the cartoon, I felt like you were talking directly to me, and like you've been listening to my conversations, because all I do is moan about bathroom distributions. And my thing with diversity, I have like a favorite tweet, which is about Beyonce and the Homecoming documentary. And someone just says, like, if Beyonce could find 10 Black women who could play the violin to concert standard, you can get better diversity on your panels. Like, and you said it in a much more like academic and professional way, but yeah, I just felt atted by that slide.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So sorry, we'll go straight on to the questions, because I feel like otherwise I'm just going to monopolize your time.
It's good to have good feedback on the slides, though.
So one of the questions that I thought was really interesting, when you were talking about the reports on the LGBT community in science, someone has asked, is that just concerning the research community, or does it take into account support staff as well?
So that the breakdowns are in there, but it was academia, but it was also teachers, science teachers. It was also people just working in STEM, people working in STEM. So it wasn't just universities, academia. It did take into account more than that. And like I said, they did a really thorough, I mean, you could probably expect that of those three learned societies, but they did a really thorough breakdown. And 1,000 respondents was a pretty good number of respondents, which is good.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this question here, I think I want to add a bit onto. So someone's asked, what options are there to report systematic discrimination within schools? But I think I'd like to add on, and universities. Because it very much feels like there isn't really very much you can do.
It's difficult. So there are, you know, I know we have it with the university, and other universities are the same. And I don't know how it works quite with schools, but there are, say, harassment advisors that you can report these things to. You should always be able to report it to someone. So whether it's your form tutor, if you're in school, whether it's your supervisor, if they don't listen, then you should be able to report it to someone in your department. You know, if you can't report it to your supervisor, then you should be able to report it to the person above. I mean, we all have a duty in the workplace and in the educational place to create a good, equitable place for people to work free of harassment. And so people actually have a duty to listen to you if you're reporting this, whether it's HR, whether it's your teachers. You know, we should be able to report this stuff. It's difficult. Things have been changing quite quickly over the last few years. And so there's a lot of people that aren't quite, I'm going to be honest, they're not up to date. I mean, up until 2003, it was illegal to talk about LGBTI plus relationships in public places. So you've got to understand that, you know, there's a lot of people my generation, we grew up in a different world. And so it sort of often feels like teachers and parents and employers are catching up, which is really sad. And so it takes a lot longer for people to catch up, basically. But in the workplace, we should certainly have that. And again, I'm under no illusions, you know, teachers, for example. I work with some of the most amazing teachers around Oxfordshire, and yet I hear from their pupils and they're saying that, you know, homophobia is still there, and, you know, ex-teacher doesn't care. And I'm thinking, actually, they're gay. They do care. But, you know, again, they don't have that training or the resources or the time. We need to start putting more money into resources, into people. We should be giving better training to our tutors, to our managers, to our teachers, and giving them more time to be able to do that, not just piling it on top of all the other things they're already doing. So you should always be able to report it. And we're trying to, at the moment, especially Tigers in STEM, but other groups as well, are definitely trying to make it where there's some sort of formal reporting, so that if someone keeps on breaking equality rules when it comes to their group, then they should be held accountable when it comes to getting funding. You know, they have a duty when they get that funding to make sure that they're using that in an equitable way. And so, you know, we really would like to see people being held to account if they're not, you know, making sure that they're promoting science for everyone. Then maybe they shouldn't have the funding. Maybe give it to someone who will. It's an idealistic way of looking at it, but we are trying.
And I think that's so important. It very much feels like with a lot of these things, like it's all people like you doing this work, but it needs to come from the top. And it's like, if the money's not invested, if the people who actually have the power to control these things don't care, there's only so much we can do.
This is, yeah, no, I completely agree. And this is why I'd say it's so important that, to me, that the learned societies are really getting on board. I mentioned the Royal Astronomical Society, there's the Royal Society of Biology. I know that they're doing really fantastic work. The Institute of Physics have had a few bumps over the summer, and they're pretty big bumps. I'm not going to pretend, but I'm working with them because I think they do honestly want to improve this, and they don't want to repeat those mistakes. And it really does, leading from the top. They just have to make sure that not only are they sort of having their equality and diversity and outreach people do this work, but that they are definitely taking it into account at the highest level when they're awarding their fellowships, for example. And I think that that pressure will start to come. And I think that it was a really good learning exercise this summer for all the societies on what they need to do to take it to the next level. And so I think that it's an important learning step, and it's why I'm so willing to work with them. What I love, one of the recommendations of the LGBT climate report was that there should be a toolkit, and just over a year later, the Royal Society of Chemistry have produced one, which, when you think about it, is quite remarkable. So I'm kind of gushing over them at the moment because they followed through. You know, they followed through. They did it, and they did it pretty quick for a learned society having a 14, 15 month turnaround. I'm impressed. I can't get things done that fast.
Yeah. Well, I guess with the Royal Society of Chemistry, having Tom Welton at the helm helps in some respects. Like,
very true. Very
he's
true.
pretty great. So
yeah.
So I've got a quick question. Will the LGBT seminar be held virtually? One of our attendees would love to join in.
Sadly, it will be held virtually. I'm really sad about that, but it's good because it means that more people will be able to come from accessibility points of view. So there's swings and roundabouts with me saying that I'm sad about that. And I would say that if you're a student or a staff member at Oxford University and you want to help, we're looking at having people to help us. We need the help. We are behind. We're not behind, but I feel like it's a mountain of organization left to do. So the more people, the better. So make sure you get your abstracts in. The deadline for abstracts giving talks is the 20th of November, but you can sign up to come to it right up to the date. That's fine. It's free to sign up. We want to make it accessible in that way. But like I say, if you're in Oxford University and you want to help, then please do.
I'm hoping you'll get lots of people offering their help.
And I should say, Catherine Boast has just put, I think maybe the poster or the link in the chat. I should say Catherine did the poster. So those beautiful fonts and that great design is Catherine's work. Thank you, Catherine. Fantastic ally.
Catherine's just so great.
Yeah.
So next question. What kind of resources could help researchers expand their networks when they're dominated by men? In an ideal world, how do we expand our groups of collaborators?
Yeah, so the truth of the matter is that you might struggle to find those people in your department, in your division, maybe. Although I would say that there's more and more groups. It's really great to see, like, there's the BIPOC group in STEM that started in Oxford. There are women in physics, there's women in materials. There's all these different groups. But then if you can't find them, I would say that Twitter has become like this professional place. It sounds weird, but certainly for STEM academics, Twitter has become this place with 500 queer scientists and Pride in STEM and things like that. What we're seeing is that we're building networks, we're building these different groups and these different collaborations. And so I know that if I'm saying this doesn't seem right at my university, I can ask someone from a different university how they would handle it, or a different university. And I'll be honest, like, having made those connections online and having that support and those people that I can talk to and ask has been really, really valuable for me. Because you get different perspectives from around the country that you just wouldn't meet them very often otherwise, even people from different fields. And then what's even great is when it's taken further, like Tigers in STEM, where it's not just LGBT, but it's diversity. And that's even better because it means I am learning so much about disabilities and race and religion. I've made mistakes earlier this year. You know, none of us are perfect. We all have things to learn. And I've got people that I can ask openly and honestly. It's like, I think I got this wrong. Why? And it's really good to be able to ask those questions. I think if people are making an honest attempt to improve, then people will be very receptive to that. People will respond. You know, it's only when you're saying things in bad faith, and people know when you're saying things in bad faith. What I often find, I use this example of people might use really homophobic language, but it's not because they're homophobic. It's just that they don't know any better. It's a legacy homophobia. You know, it's just they don't know. They don't know the difference. They don't know why it's damaging. And yet the people that I find are really, really homophobic are those that don't use the homophobic language. They don't use the homophobic language, but it's the way they talk about things. It's the way they do it, that their actions are homophobic rather than the actual words themselves. And I see that with transphobia and racism. I'm more worried about those. Like I say, if you're asking stuff in good faith, people will respect that.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to hide your hatred behind like language.
Pretty words.
Yeah. So we're getting close to the end, but we still have a lot of questions. Would you mind staying on for 5 more minutes?
That's absolutely fine. I'm happy to.
So this is a question that I think is quite tricky, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway. What do you think I personally can do as a prospective undergraduate student to help? I assume that's what they're asking.
Yeah, I think so. You can't underestimate the importance of coming to events like this and just learning more, just hearing more, just expanding your knowledge. Like I say, I've been attending talks on race and stuff so that I can improve my knowledge. You can't underestimate, to the person asking that, you're here, which is an amazing step. That's an amazing thing to do. You've now heard another perspective and you know a little bit more. And so, like I say, don't underestimate that because knowledge is really important. But then, you know, if you do see people using homophobic, transphobic language, racist language, if you feel safe to challenge that. If you see lecturers using that sort of language, challenge that as well. I realize that, again, there's a power dynamic you can't always challenge, but it's very much about, you know, making sure that you can challenge for the people that you're an ally to so that they don't have to. But at the same time, if they do want to speak, you know, make sure that you sort of give them the opportunity to speak, support them to speak. And if not, then you can sort of speak on their behalf, but don't speak for them. Just I actually put up a slide of a gay journalist earlier, and his heart is so much in the right place, but he often does speak for trans people when he doesn't actually have that understanding that he should do, and he often takes the space of a trans person when he shouldn't. He's still a great ally, but I wish he'd improve on that. So just think about how you're doing it, and also just, you know, if you do hear maybe suggest more diverse people. If you know there's a panel or a conference or talks, make some suggestions of different people so that they can actually, so that it doesn't become a very generic, all the same panel.
Yeah, I think one thing I've become very aware of, at least within the department recently, is who we're inviting, and if we're giving them the platform to speak, like, we should always try and give it to people who have not got controversial views, shall we say.
And I will say that, you know, I mean, you can find it difficult. I mean, you know, someone was asking me, oh, do you know a trans person of color in this particular field? And I was like, there's not that many trans people that are of the state where they can talk in the field, certainly not in your specific field, and even in science, maybe less people of color that are trans. Again, it doesn't mean they're not out there, but there tends to be a limited number. So sometimes you can't, you know, cover all your bases. But and we've got to remember that, you know, there are some fantastic speakers that would fit those categories, but they tend to be asked all the time. And so if they say no, don't take that as something offensive. It's just that they're busy. They're doing a lot, and we're people. We only have so much capacity, right?
Yeah, and you don't always get paid for your work, which I think is something
Well, yes,
it would be nice. I'm sure you have opinions on that. That's the dream, is getting people like you paid for all the extra stuff that you do that just like doesn't really benefit your career in any way, but is so valuable to the rest of us.
Well, one thing is that, you know, it would be nice if you did get paid for it more often, not just because I live in Oxford on my own, so I'm always broke, but also, like you said, it should benefit our career. We should actually, the people that are doing outreach and bringing new people into physics that maybe will have that breakthrough, we should be rewarding that. We should treat that you know, as much as papers, because that work is a really big, important thing. And so we should value outreach.
Yeah. So this is something that I've spoken about within the department with the administration. And I think that at least like in Oxford physics, it's the view of a lot of people in like the upper echelons, and hopefully we can like turn that into something. But obviously we're just like one department, and you know, but I completely agree with you.
Yeah. But there are some really good people in physics. I know that.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to know some of them. So I'm going to do one last question and then we'll leave. And so I'm sorry to everyone that I couldn't ask you questions. This seems to happen. Like everyone loves the speakers and wants to ask them loads of questions. So it's a bit of a long one, but I'll do my best. So the American Physical Society has just announced that they're going to consider police presence and conduct in potential conference host cities. And with grant awarding bodies, we are seeing some adoption of the policy that harassers can't get funding. Do you think these kinds of sanctions should be broadened? Like, should we adopt a carrot versus stick? Like, which approach do you think is best in terms of, you know, like making the culture better? Do we need to like encourage people, or do we need to police people? It's a tricky one.
No, that's a good question. So, I think so. There's this whole this is a whole different discussion. In fact, actually, I think I'm doing a talk with Oxford Young Greens tomorrow on cancel culture, and I think it's relevant here that everyone can have a platform, anyone can have a platform, but who we decide to give our platform to, who we decide to give voice to, that's important. And it's not about the people that you say we're not giving a platform to, because a very big message from that is also that we know that these people affect you, therefore, and we want you to come. So it's not just about who they're saying we don't want at our conference, but it's very much saying who we do want at our conference. It's this very open, welcoming thing. And so being in the position like the APS, where they can say like, well, we want to make it as open as possible for as many people to come as possible, that's going to make a difference to an awful lot of people. And so it's amazing. Like I say, everyone can have a platform, but who we choose to give our platform to, you know, no one has a right to my platform. No one has a right to come on my podcast. And so seeing those societies saying, like I say, it's not about who they're stopping coming, it's about who they're inviting by making that statement. And that's really important, especially when we know that, say, Black people are significantly more likely to be on the receiving end of negative actions from the police in America. And, you know, the numbers are there. Then that's making a really strong statement to BIPOC, which I think is a wonderful thing. And, you know, there are other organizations that are saying we won't hold a conference in this country because they have homophobia, because being gay is illegal, for instance. They're really strong statements. And like I say, it's about who you're inviting, not about who you're not inviting.
That's such a brilliant answer. Well, thank you so much for doing this and for such a fantastic talk, genuinely brilliant. And I'm sure I'm going to be hearing from people all week about how excellent it was. So thank you so much for your time, your work, and for everything you do. It's really appreciated.
Oh, no problem at all. It's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. So bye, everyone. It's been great.